How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Buddy's House of Horror podcast, and welcome to part one of every horror film that I saw in 2023 reviewed. I want to thank you guys for checking out the House of Horror this year, and we're just going to get right to the show because you know how I am. I like to keep my intro short and sweet, but I just want to remind you guys, if you haven't already, to please make sure you're subscribing to my show wherever you're listening to the show, whether it be YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your show. Make sure you are supporting it by subscribing, sharing it with a friend, and doing all of those great things. And if you're watching this over on YouTube, please make sure you're giving this video a thumbs up as well. And with that, we're just going to get right to the show. So now let's get spooky. How is it going, everyone? Welcome back to another terrifying episode of Buddy's House of Horror podcast, and welcome to what I am as sure is the first of many parts, many segments of reviewing every single horror film that I saw this year, the year of 2023. One of these years I'm going to learn my lesson. One of these years I'm going to record about each and every one of these films right after watching it, so it's fresh in my brain. I'm not thinking back all the way back to January. Of course, now it is fall time. I'm thinking all the way back to January up until the current time about all of these films that I saw. All I have are my little chicken scratch notes, a quick Letterboxd star ranking, and things of that nature to try to remember these films. One of these years, I'm going to do it where after I watch a film, I go record for about 2 to 3, 5 minutes, just my general thoughts on the film, splice it all together, and then that will be every horror film that I saw in that given year. Maybe for 2024 I'll do that. Maybe for 2025 I will do that. I'm not sure, but that's something I'm gonna have to do. Not that I don't enjoy doing the podcast in this fashion, but I'm just trying to think of ways that I can keep the show fresh, keep the show interesting, and I think that would be an interesting sort of way to do it. So maybe at some point I'll do that, but for now you're getting the good old-fashioned Buddy scrolls through his Letterboxd account and talks about every single film that he saw in 2023. So we're going to get right to it right now. So here we are. I don't know why I'm talking like this because we're in the episode. This is not an intro. I'm doing a second intro to an episode that already started. But it's fine. Maybe it's because I'm wigging out on this coffee I just had. For those of you guys that know, I do frequent Starbucks around this time of year to get the pumpkin cream cold brew. Today I went for more traditional hot coffee variety. My normal white coffee drink when I go to my normal hot coffee drink is a white chocolate mocha served hot. Sometimes I'll go a little crazy, get a couple pumps of something else in there, maybe some cinnamon dolce, maybe some hazelnut, but today it was just the straight hot white mocha. That's been my go-to drink for Starbucks for many years, ever since I started going to Starbucks, which was probably the last 10 years or so. I've been going to Starbucks. I used to live right down the street from a Starbucks. But it's not something I grew up with. There was never a Starbucks in my hometown and anything. And the real Starbucks craze sort of happened when I was not really getting it that much. I still don't get it that often, but if I do stop and get a coffee somewhere, I'm typically more inclined to get it from a Starbucks rather than a Dunkin' Donuts or something like that. I do enjoy local coffee shops as well, but then you got to get out of your car. You got to walk in there. A lot of times I know people that are in there when I'm going into the coffee shop. So if I'm just trying to get coffee and get going, I'm not going to a Get-Go. I'm going to a Starbucks to get my coffee fix. I'm going to be getting the pumpkin cream cold brews very soon, but today sticking with the hot coffee. And they say hot girls, they always have at least 3 drinks. So I had the hot coffee, I've got a Gatorade Frost here, and then I've got my water. So 3 drinks, I am fucking good to go. We're ready to talk about some horror films. I hope all of you guys have been enjoying the House of Horror so far. I'm not exactly sure when in the release schedule this episode is going to be coming out, but I hope that no matter when this comes out in the month, you have been enjoying all of the episodes so far. Or if this is the very first episode, it probably won't be the very first episode, but if for some reason this is the first episode I put out, welcome to the House of Horror. there's no way this is going to be the first episode. But this might be someone's first episode who hasn't seen the show before or listened to the show before or isn't familiar with the show. If this is your first episode with me, thank you for joining me along for the ride. If you guys have any friends who are interested or might be interested in the House of Horror, please make sure you're pointing the show in their direction. Share this link with a few friends, family members, anyone who is into anything in the spooky realm, horror films, vacation horror. I want to do an episode about all the best places you can go on vacation if you are a horror fan. Horror literature, the horrors of real life. We've talked about true crime and stuff like that on the show before. If there's anyone in your life that you think would enjoy this show, make sure you're sending them a link to the show, getting them in touch with me. And yeah, help spread the good word of the House of Horror. And with that, I think that's enough housekeeping for this episode. I'm sure I'm going to go on many tangents as I tend to do, but we're just going to dive right into the horror films that I saw this year. Again, this is part 1 out of at least 3 to 4 parts, I would imagine, of this. I don't know how many are going to be coming out in October, but this is going to be the first part out of what I would assume to be several parts covering all of the films this year, because I watch a lot of films, more than I can cover in one podcast if I talk about them more than like 5 seconds. I could go through a whole podcast. It could be one podcast where I just list everything out, but I do like to touch on the films, give you a little synopsis, tell you what I thought of the film, tell you what I remember about the film, what I don't like about the film. Just anything just in a couple minutes, nothing too crazy. These aren't in-depth reviews. They're just general reflections and just quick, like, bullet point stuff about all the films that I watched. A lot of the films in this list I will be covering on more in-depth episodes of the show, or I have previously covered in-depth on other episodes of the show. So for some of them, I'm not really going to go too much into at all, and just point you in the direction of the episode which covers it more in detail. The first one we're starting off with, we're in January of 2023. Only watched a couple horror films this month. Some of them one of them was a rewatch. The first one here is a rewatch of one of the newest horror classics. One of the new characters who you can see sitting right next to Michael Myers. You see him sitting right next to, Jason Voorhees, even Sam from Trick or Treat, Pennywise. The new horror icon is Art the Clown. It is without a doubt Art the Clown is the newest horror character that we can see as like a mainstream kind of big horror fixture. In a few years, you're going to be walking into Halloween stores, Spirit Halloweens and stuff like that, and just seeing Art the Clown all over the place, I feel. He is the new Freddy Krueger. He's the new Michael Myers. He is that new guy, at least for right now. But I rewatched the first Terrifier. It was the first time in a few years that I had went and rewatched Terrifier, because Jared and Maisie, of course, my dear friends Mazer Laser and Dynamite Jared from the Brain Damage podcast, they hadn't seen it. So we had them over one night and we're like, fuck it, we're going to watch Terrifier. The original plan was to watch Terrifier and Terrifier 2 in the same night, but we only watched the first one. From 2016, directed, of course, by Damien Leone. A maniacal clown named Art terrorizes 3 young women and everyone else who stands in his way on Halloween night. The first one, very short film, short, sweet, to the point. Second one, very long film. I think that if you could have sort of balanced it out a little bit better, you'd have good 2-hour movies, like slightly over an hour and a half movies. But regardless, we have one that's under 90 minutes. We have one that's well over 2 hours. So that's just kind of the way the cookie crumbled. But, it is what it is. As I said, the first time watching it with them, they both seem to enjoy it. I think it's the perfect runtime, as I said. And, of course, this isn't the first film to feature the Art the Clown character, but it's the first one where he's sort of the central focus of the film. The first one was the anthology All Hallows Eve, but this is the first one where it's all about Art. It's the first one where it's played by the same actor who plays him in Terrifier 2, was portrayed by a different person in the All Hallows Eve film. Great kills, great gore, not just from Art, but one of his former victims in the intro has a great kill in there. One scene that always sticks out in my mind, it's the pizza shop scene, and of course there's the big kill at the end, which I don't want. Well, I guess it's like midway through the film, which if you haven't seen it, It's definitely something worth watching the film for. It's very gory, it's very violent, but sort of the general vibe of the film is that it's also kind of funny. Like, although the kills are gory and disturbing and horrendous, it's all taken with that sense of humor. It's all taken with a grain of salt. Like, it's not something that's like too dark and violent where it's genuinely disturbing. I mean, on paper it is when like you read it, but like watching it and in that tone and in the certain environment that you're in, you know that everything is all in good fun, especially behind the scenes. Like, you know, everyone just had a blast doing all this kind of stuff. All art on top of his like violent and gory kills, which he is known for, he also uses a gun in the film, which I think is hysterical. It does have a little bit of story structuring issues that I don't agree with, but overall, I guess it doesn't really matter too much. Like, there's a big focus on a few certain characters midway through the film, or like towards the final act, it sort of shifts its focus onto other things, without giving too much away, which I don't really agree with. I wish that you could have done this a little bit differently, kind of made the overall story feel more cohesive. But as it is, it's not really like a deal breaker or anything. It is what it is. So those are my brief thoughts on Terrifier. And coming up the next day, I watched a film which had been on my list since it came out. I watched it about 3 years too late, because I've been wanting to watch it since it came out in 2020. The Wolf of Snow Hollow, watched by me on January 15th, 2023. Directed, starring, and written by Jim Cummings. A different Jim Cummings, not the guy who played Winnie the Pooh, but a different guy. Welcome to Snow Hollow. A stressed-out police officer struggles not to give in with the paranoia that grips a small town as bodies turn up after each full moon. As I said, it was all written, directed, and starring by the same guy. He's a good actor. He reminds me a lot of my friend Jesse DeFranco and his style of acting. So I guess like I have like this little connection to the film that like I didn't know, just because the main character really reminds me of an actor I really admire and I'm friends with, and who I think is absolutely phenomenal. So like just like seeing this film through that light, it made me like the film maybe a little bit more than I would have normally, just because of the similarities he has with one of my friends. As far as his character in the film though, he's a dick. But he's sort of a likable dick within like the context of the film. One thing that I do love to this, it's like a mystery, right? They're thinking that a werewolf is attacking the town. Part of the town is like, oh, it's a real werewolf. Some people think it's not a real werewolf. It's your typical werewolf movie kind of stuff. And one thing that I do like, and is that I'm sure that if you were to rewatch the film again, which I do plan on doing at some point, it seems like it's one of those films where it kind of like hints all the way through what the reveal is going to be, and it sort of gives little winks and nods throughout. And so watching it again, I'm sure I'm going to pick up on all kinds of stuff, Easter eggs and stuff like that if you go back and watch it again, I'm sure. My biggest gripe about the film is because of kind of what I wanted it to be, rather than what it was, but that is a spoiler. So I'm just going to kind of leave it at that, was that I wish the story kind of went in a different direction, which I think could have been a really cool idea. But the way the story is, the way it plays out, I still think is a 3.5-star film. So, I mean, my gripes that I have with it, just stops it from being a great film, and just a great film, just a good film, just a film that I really like. It takes it from being something that I thought could have been like one of my favorite modern horror films, I guess. But regardless, I really enjoyed The Wolf of Snow Hollow. There's not a whole lot to say about it without giving things away. Just a great mystery. It has a great sense of humor to it. Humor as well as thrills, as well as horror elements. It does play out like a thriller at some points. I think it is really good. It has a good like opening segment in it as well. And yeah, I just really enjoyed the film. So Wolf of Snow Hollow, definitely go and check it out. Rounding out the month of January in terms of horror, I only watched one more horror film this month. And it was, of course, Skinamarink, which I have covered in depth on a podcast. I did like a whole hour episode covering Skinamarink. So, of course, it came out in late 2022 at film festivals and stuff, widely released in 2023. Directed by Kyle Edward Ball. In this house, two children wake up in the middle of the night to find their father is missing and all the windows and doors in their home have vanished. This was the first time I watched it. We watched it in theaters. I told the story in the podcast that I did, how we found our cat Binky on the street, brought him into the house, and now we have our little Skinamarink Binky who lives with us. Brand new member of the family who I will think about Skinamarink every time I think of my cat because it was the same night. I've rewatched the film since. I've watched it twice. And if you want to see my full thoughts and opinions on the film, I definitely would recommend checking out my full review of Skinamarink from back in February, I believe I released it. So I will direct you guys there to go and check out my thoughts on Skinamarink. Did I love it? Did I hate it? I'm not going to tell you. I would rather you just watch the episode and see. So yeah, that is it for the month of January, and now we're going to move on to the month of February, where I watched, in comparison, quite a few more films than I did in January. So the first watch of February that was not a rewatch, because as I said, I rewatched Skinamarink in February. Coming up on February 10th, I watched for the first time a film that I had heard about for years from Jared, one of his... I don't want to say one of his new favorites, but a film that he definitely talked about a lot, and a film that he watched. This film and the sequel, and like it would come up in conversation fairly often, was Hell House LLC, which is a found footage film from 2015. It is the first film in what became a trilogy, but I would imagine that there would be a few more after this. Hopefully, because although the series, and I don't want to go into in depth because I might be covering this series in another episode, so when I'm talking about Hell House LLC, I'm also going to keep it a little bit brief, but it's a series that I enjoy. I enjoy the Hell House LLC series, even though I can acknowledge that not all of the films are good. And I can acknowledge that the majority of the films in the franchise, like 2 out of 3 of the films, really aren't that great, but I just really sort of enjoy them for some reason. It's just something about them makes me kind of like drawn to them. I don't know why, but the first Hell House LLC I can vouch for is a good, solid found footage film. Just to sort of give you a little synopsis of the plot. 5 years after an unexplained malfunction causes the death of 15 tourgoers and staff on the opening night of a Halloween haunted house tour, a documentary crew travels back to the scene of the tragedy to find out what really happened. And this film, I watched it not too far off from another film of like a similar genre and style, which was the WNUF Halloween special. I watched this a couple months later. I do see a lot of similarities to that film, although this obviously came out first, but I don't want to say I get the two confused because they are very different in a lot of ways, but they're just sort of similar style, similar vibes. You're going into a place where a tragedy happened when probably you shouldn't. It's found footage, it's low budget, so they're just very similar kind of films. Hell House LLC, as I said, it sort of started what is about to be a franchise, I guess, and it follows, they go into the haunted house, and they're trying to make their own haunted house attraction again after the tragedy had occurred a few years before. You see at the beginning of the film, I believe, sort of like a flash forward to what happens, and then it sort of leads you up into that point, and then you get your payoff at the end. I like the characters in the film. They are a lot of fun. They're, you have the mastermind of the haunted house who wants everyone there, and he's hiring the actors. And it has a creepy clown in the film. I'm sure that you've seen images of the clown. And it's basically just like a mannequin with a clown mask, but it's appearing and reappearing in strange areas of the house. And it's a film that, as I said, I don't want to go too much in depth into, because I do... Maybe if it's not in this year's House of Horror, I do want to do an entire episode sort of covering the whole series, because I have watched the whole series. So, Hell House LLC, I do recommend the first one. in the same day, later that night, and I had envisioned putting this film on, and there had been all kinds of hype around the film, right? This next one I'm about to talk about. There was so much hype, so I was either like, this is going to be good, it's going to be bad. I don't expect it to like blow me away or anything, because I don't really buy into hype with films, but I genuinely thought it was phenomenal. It was so good, in fact, I put it on late at night thinking if it sucks, I will fall asleep during the film, and then that'll be the end of it. But I started it at 11 o'clock at night, and I finished it. Like, I stayed up. I was not tired at all. My eyes were glued to the screen. I was not fading in and out at all. I was completely captivated and gripped, like, right from the film started. And that film is The Menu. Debatable whether or not it's a true horror film. It's more of a thriller, but definitely has some horrific elements to it. Very surprised by it, as I said, because it was strikingly different from what I thought the film was going to be. I don't know, I sort of had like a notion in my head kind of how it was going to go, but it completely was something totally different from what I imagined. I tried not to read too much up on the film before watching it. I kind of just looked at the poster and stuff like that, saw a couple reviews online, but didn't watch any real trailers for it, didn't read up on like the behind the scenes or anything like that, because again, it was a film that was like hyped so much that I kind of was like, well, if I ever watch this damn thing, I want to go in like as blind as possible, try to keep my expectations blank. And this was it was a relatively new release at the time. Like, it came out like maybe a couple months prior to when I watched it. I watched it like as soon as it hit to streaming. Wonderful surprises await you all, as they did. They awaited me for sure. A couple travels to a coastal island to eat at an exclusive restaurant where the chef has prepared a lavish menu with some shocking surprises. And shocking they are. It was a lot of fun. I mean, this film was just... It's another one that I would like to rewatch at some point. It's just so fun to watch. It's part Saw. It's part the Twilight Zone episode The Mask. It's part Dangerous Game. There is so much sort of engulfed into this film. And I don't want to give I'm saying that over and over again, but I don't want to give everything away with these. It's part Saw because everyone is there. Okay, so they all go to this island, right? And it's all rich people. It's all the elite. They're getting this exclusive dinner by this masterful chef, but they're all there for a specific reason. They were all handpicked to be there because they're all shitty fucking people. And this mastermind puts it all together. So immediately you think Jigsaw and how he is planning out all of these steps for these people. So it's very much Jigsaw. It's very much Dangerous Game, because you're hunting humans, I guess. In Dangerous Game, there's a similar sort of aspect that happens in this as well, which definitely gave me Dangerous Game vibes. And Twilight Zone The Mask, where basically there's the old man and all the family wants to inherit his fortune, and he basically calls them all out for being the shittiest people of all time. So it's definitely like that as well. So it has a combination of three things that I really enjoy. There's great acting all the way around in the film, stellar performances from everyone. Anya Taylor-Joy, she can do no wrong. She's great in everything that she's in. Same with Ralph Fiennes. Of course, one of my favorite films from him, Grand Budapest Hotel. Not so much a Harry Potter fan, but he was great in the small clips from those movies that I have seen. I have not seen the majority of the Harry Potter cinematic experience. I haven't seen very much with Nick Hoult in it up until that point. Of course, he was in Renfield, which I saw later. But everything that I did see him in previous to that, like Warm Bodies and stuff like that, I mean, he's good in everything that he's been in as well. So good, stellar performances from the three leads. Of course, Luigi is in it. John Leguizamo, who played Luigi from the Super Mario Brothers movie in the 90s. He's in it. He's fun. It reminds me, in hindsight, it reminds me of those elite rich people, just like the ones that were on that submarine that went to the Titanic. You don't feel bad when bad shit happens to them. So, like, in hindsight, this movie could be The Submarine. It's a fish out of water story, and it's a more recent film that it kind of reminds me of is something like Midsummer. There's lots of philosophy involved. It's not, as I said, it's not like a real traditional horror film. It's more psychological thriller with some horror elements into it. It's a film I really want to rewatch in the future because I'm sure there's a tons of things in it that I missed. But what I did see in it, I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed the dynamic between Anya Taylor-Joy's character and Ralph Fiennes. They kind of have like this special connection because both of them sort of came from nothing. So they sort of share this like unique bond where although Ralph Fiennes is doing some evil maniacal things, he kind of doesn't want anything bad to happen to her because as we come to find out, she was never supposed to be there. So a lot of twists and turns in the film. I really enjoy it a lot. The Menu, 4 stars from me, which I have been getting a little generous with my Letterboxd scores as of late, or maybe I've become more appreciative of film as of late. But I found myself rating stuff highly more frequently. At least in this last year, I found myself sort of rating things highly, which is good because I've been enjoying a lot of stuff. So The Menu, 4 stars from me. And coming up next is one of my least favorites of the year that I watched, and one of the least favorites of the year because it was a new release. And Miles and I have talked about it a little bit on some shows, but dear God, Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, I kind of don't want to drag it through the dirt because I do know that they are making a sequel. I do not have any bad intentions towards the film crew or anything like that. I hope that they can make something really great with the second one. I hope that they make it a lot better than this first one because I did not enjoy this first one. Leading up to the event, I had to get a hot honey chicken sandwich before just to kind of make the vibes all around Winnie the Pooh-esque. We went to a restaurant and I happened to see there was something on the menu that had honey in it. And I was like, well, fuck, we're going to see Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. Definitely got to get the hot honey sandwich. I gave this film a half star on Letterboxd, which is quite the task to earn a half star from me on Letterboxd. I've rated more films 5 stars than I have half a star, and I barely rank any film 5 star on Letterboxd. But there's even less half stars, and I've rated, I think, 2 films this year half stars. So they're tied for the worst films that I've seen this year. But one of them is Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. Saw it February 15th, 2023. It was a special showing, I believe. I think it was like a one-night only event. My review on Letterboxd: picture the worst YouTube fan film you can imagine. Now put it into theaters. That is what Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey felt like to me. This ain't no bedtime story. Christopher Robin is headed off to college and he has abandoned his old friends, Pooh and Piglet, which then leads to the duo embracing their inner monsters. So, what about this film doesn't work? Pretty much everything. I understand that there are some legal things going on because Winnie the Pooh, the big deal with this one was Winnie the Pooh went into the public domain, so they're like, fuck it, we're gonna do a Winnie the Pooh horror film. Problem with that is it doesn't really feel anything like Winnie the Pooh. Like, it feels like, and I don't want to speak for the director, but I get the sense that, like, the director really wasn't a big Winnie the Pooh fan, I guess. Like, I think it would have been better if you did it more faithful to the source material, but made it horror. This is simply, it's just a slasher film, and it's a dude in a Winnie the Pooh mask. Like, that's all it is. Like, it's nothing. They do try to tie it in at the beginning. Like, there is some Winnie the Pooh lore in it, but at the end of the day, it's a dude in a Pooh mask killing people. Like, it's not anything, like, you're not going to find a bunch of references to it. It's not something that was made for fans of Winnie the Pooh. It was made as a cheap cash grab because Winnie the Pooh was in the public domain. It's not like they were very passionate about the intellectual property they were adapting, I guess. Like, I don't want to really drag it completely through the dirt, but I do need to address that it just wasn't well done. There was nothing about it that was well done. Shitty acting. It looked kind of sleek at some points. Like, the camera work wasn't the worst, but it definitely wasn't anything to write home about. I'll read Miles's review of this because Miles is a champion of this film. He thinks it's a modern masterpiece. But he says it's probably one of the dumbest films in cinematic history, but I couldn't take my eyes off it. Pure trash in the best way possible. Cried laughing a ton. I am not sure if I've seen characters make worse choices in a film ever. There were some pretty bad choices from the characters in this. Like, they're getting trapped in a house, and I don't know, like, there's so many ways that they could have defended themselves, so many ways that they could have escaped, and it's just, like, so dumb. And I wish they would have brought more characters in. Like, at the beginning of the film, you see basically one of the plot points at the beginning of the film is they're abandoned in the forest, so they need to eat Eeyore to survive. So, like, there's Eeyore, there's, like, Owl and Rabbit, I guess, in this, too. But they don't really show them, like, in costume in the film. It's just, like, through animation at the beginning. So, like, I wish that there could have been more characters involved in this besides just Pooh and Piglet. Like, you didn't have to kill off Eeyore. Like, that's someone they could have used in the film to spread some more mayhem. But it is what it is. I would imagine the sequel is coming out the same time that Tigger goes into the public domain. So I'm hoping to see Tigger in the new movie. I'm hoping that in the new movie just all around, I wish they just do better than the first one. Because it is such a, like, unique idea. It's really the first time that a major property has been made like this, like in theaters, a legit version. Not a YouTube fan film. Something that you can put in theaters, something that's legal to do. And I feel they squander that opportunity. I feel like it's a really missed opportunity for something like that. So for me, not a fan, didn't like it, hoping for the best. I wish all the filmmakers the best of luck making the sequel, because I genuinely hope that it's something good. I genuinely hope that I can go and watch it, and it's something that I enjoy and don't have to bitch about. I want to enjoy films. I don't go into a film wanting to hate on it. I want to enjoy films. I'm spending money to go see these films. I want to have a good time. And the entire time in this film, I disagree with Miles about him laughing so hard, because I was sitting in this film, I had the deadest stare the entire time. I don't think I laughed. I didn't I didn't jump for many of the scares. Nothing. It was just deadpan the entire film. And that's not what I want when I go to see a horror film. I want to at least enjoy myself in some ways. I have similar opinions to a film we'll talk about later on in the year about films that are supposed to be so bad that they're good, but there's just something, like, not genuine about it, or there's something, I don't know. There's a difference between so bad it's good and so bad it's bad. Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey definitely falls into so bad that it is absolutely horrendous. So bad. Half star from me on Letterboxd, which is almost unheard of, as I said. But coming up next, I guess, is sort of a palate cleanser. I guess it ironically worked out this way. I got to watch American Movie, one of my favorite films. Not a horror film, but a film about the making of a horror film. So, as you guys know, I teach at Cleveland State, and I want to show this film every semester that I teach. So, American Movie made its appearance on this, what day was it? February 16th. On this February afternoon, I brought the students together to watch American Movie, the making of Northwestern, also the making of Coven, which is primarily what they were making in the film. American Movie is the story of filmmaker Mark Borchardt, his mission, and his dream, spanning over 2 years of intense struggle with his film, his family, financial decline, and spiritual crisis. American Movie is a portrayal of ambition, obsession, excess, in one man's quest for the American dream. In my top 5 films of all time, I've done an episode of American Movie and Coven double feature on the show before, so definitely go check that out. I believe that was from either 2021 or 2020. One of those years we did American Movie and American Coven in the same podcast. It was a double feature. So definitely go check that out. It's a film I would love to do. I could do a whole commentary on the film. I would love to get Mark Borchardt on the show someday. So if you guys have deep-rooted personal connections with Mark Borchardt, I would love to have him on the show. But regardless, I'm not going to talk about American Movie that much because it is not a horror film. And this is Buddy's House of Horror. We're talking about horror. And we're talking about a horrendous film that is coming up next, which is Hell House LLC 2, The Abaddon Hotel. Oh, dear God. What is there for me to say about Hell House LLC 2, The Abaddon Hotel? Directed by the same mastermind as the first one. This one a couple years later in 2018. As you guys know, I have bad luck with stuff called Abaddon. Not a fan of the film Abaddon. Not a fan of Hell House LLC 2, The Abaddon Hotel. This one... Well, let's see on Letterboxd what they have to say about it. 8 years after the opening night tragedy of Hell House LLC, many unanswered questions remain. Thanks to an anonymous tip, an investigative journalist is convinced that key evidence is hidden inside the abandoned Abaddon Hotel. She assembles a team to break into the hotel in hopes of discovering the truth. But the source of the tip and the secrets of the Abaddon Hotel are more horrifying than any of them could have imagined. The acting in this film is horrible. Like, that is the main detriment to Hell House LLC 2. The first one has decent acting. The third one, which we're going to talk about in a second, naturally, has pretty decent acting. I mean, there's some shitty stuff in there as well. But it was way worse in Hell House LLC 2. Borderline unwatchable. Again, I don't want to say too much about the film because, as I said, I kind of want to do more of a series retrospective at some point. So I'm going to keep my thoughts on Hell House LLC 2 relatively brief. Just know I gave it 1.5 star, which, as I said, it's kind of rare for me to give something under something under 2 stars. So, not a fan. Hell House LLC 3, The Lake of Fire. The Abaddon Hotel will once again open its doors to the public, and the evil lurking within shall finally be unleashed. This one, it took them less time to make this one. This one was only a year later in 2019. Set 1 year after the events of Hell House LLC 2, the hotel is on the verge of being torn down when it is purchased by billionaire Russell Wynn as the new home for his popular interactive show, Insomnia. He invites journalist Vanessa Shepard and her crew to record everything happening inside the hotel leading up to the performance. But they soon encounter a more nefarious plot, one that threatens to unleash a veritable hell on Earth. There's lots of stuff that's reused from the first 2 films in this, which is kind of what one of the biggest detriments is, especially during the opening segments. There's a lot sprinkled throughout the film when they're exploring their hotel. It'll cut back in from what happened there last time that someone was in that location in a previous film. But particularly, like, in the opening segments, there is a ton of reused footage. Not as much as in Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 2, but you're sitting there and you're thinking, like, I've literally seen all of this before, because it was literally in the last film and the film prior to this. 2 films ago and last film. I've literally seen this, like, an hour ago when I was watching the second one. I think it's very interesting that they're performing Faust at the hotel during Insomnia. Faust, of course, one of my favorite silent films. If you guys have seen my top 10 silent films video, there's a great basement scene in this. It's probably like the standout moment of the film. And it's where, once again, we see the mannequin clowns, and I will leave it at that as to not give everything away, but it's a great, great scene in the basement with the mannequin clowns. Some terrible CGI effects in this, at the end in particular. Not a big fan of those. But overall, I did relatively enjoy the film. I do like the film. I like the aesthetic of all the film. I like the way the films make me feel. Even though the highest one I only rated 3, and then one of them got 1.5, this one gets 2.5. I do enjoy just this franchise in general. I do enjoy the Hell House LLC franchise, even though I can acknowledge that they are not particularly the greatest films from beginning to end. The next film that was in my list for February, I watched it the following day. Hell House LLC 2 and 3 were a double feature. I did a triple feature the following day. This must have been a weekend. I must have been off, and my wife must have been out of town if I was watching this many films in a weekend. But I watched The Last Broadcast. Finally watched The Last Broadcast, of course, one of the first true found footage films predating the Blair Witch Project. I believe this was a year before, year or two before maybe, from 1998. What actually happened that night in the woods? In December 1995, a four-man team from the public access program Fact or Fiction braved the New Jersey's desolate Pine Barrens, determined to deliver a live broadcast of the legendary Jersey Devil. Of course, mythical creature, Jersey Devil. I learned about the Jersey Devil through Cinemassacre. Actually, there's a film about the Jersey Devil. So that was the first time I had heard about him. But it's a very, very famous mythical creature, kind of like a Bigfoot scenario, up in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. But anyway, back to the synopsis. Only one of these journalists came out alive. It took the jury 90 minutes to sentence the lone survivor to life in prison. 1 year later, a filmmaker decides to mount his own investigation. So he's going in the Pine Barrens trying to figure out what happened because of this. And I really like the documentary feel of the film. It feels very nostalgic, even though I didn't grow up with it. I feel a weird sense of nostalgia to The Last Broadcast, just kind of the way it was shot, kind of the way it makes you feel throughout. I like how they actually play the voiceover tape. And what I mean by that is they actually showed the tape, like, moving as the voiceover is going on. You're not just listening to a voiceover with images and captions. It adds an extra little touch of realism that I really loved. What I don't like about this film is sort of the turning point when the film becomes something else. And I'll just straight up say it in here because I don't want you to go into this film and sort of be like blindsided by it. It just kind of stops being found footage. Like towards the climax. It just stops being found footage. You see what is really going on. It turns into like an actual film towards the end, from what I recall. You see what is actually going on with this journalist who is making the film. There's a big twist, and honestly, I don't like that sort of twist they took with the story. I thought it would have been a lot better if they would have kept it straightforward, but I guess I won't say they tried to do something different because it was one of the first found footage movies ever. But it definitely makes a film that could have been 4 stars only like 3. So I do really like it. I do recommend it as a found footage film, especially for the historical aspects of it, you know, predating Blair Witch Project and stuff like that. But as far as plot and like overall decisions they made with it, not the biggest fan of some choices they made, particularly in the ending. But it still has a lot of unique ideas, still has a lot of good things to keep you interested and invested all the way through. I was never bored during the film. That's the big thing with like found footage. People are like, oh, this is boring, like you're just waiting for something to happen. Not the case in this, not the case in the Hell House LLC series either, which I just talked about. Coming up after that, I watched Lake Mungo, which is another film that I had been wanting to watch for many years since it came out. It came out in 2008. I remember working at the Family Video Store. If you guys don't remember Family Video Stores, if you're too young to remember walking into a video store in your life, this was it was like one of the horror marathons, like the Nights of Terror, like selection picks or something. So it was like a cover art that I always saw, and it was always something I wanted to watch. And for whatever reason, I never ended up watching it until 2023. It took me till 2008. It took me until 2023 to watch this film. If you've never seen a ghost, look closer. After 16-year-old Alice Palmer drowns in a local dam, her family experiences a series of strange, inexplicable events centered in and around their home. Unsettled, the Palmers seek the help of a psychic and a parapsychologist who discover that Alice led a secret double life. At Lake Mungo, Alice's secret past emerges. This was a lot of fun to watch. It was something that I had wanted to watch for so many years. It didn't live up to the preconceived hype that I had about it in my head. I only gave it 2.5 stars, but it was a film that I really enjoyed watching, but it was sandwiched in between two films that I actually really enjoyed. The Last Broadcast, although it had some problems, didn't really care for some of the aspects of it. I still really enjoyed watching it, but the film I watched after that, after Lake Mungo, was a film that I really loved watching, and that was The House by the Cemetery, which is something, again, that's been on a watch list for me for many years. This is from 1981. It's a Fulci. I've been getting really into like Italian cinema in recent years. And House by the Cemetery, it's always had an iconic artwork to it. It's always been a film that I've wanted to watch, and it's on Shudder. So I was like, you know what? It's finally time to just bite the bullet, sit down, watch this as the last part of a triple feature. One thing that I liked when I was selecting these films was it wasn't just random. I picked all 3 films of these were under 90 minutes. So although I was doing a marathon, it wasn't like I was watching like fucking like Lord of the Rings back to back to back. I was picking stuff that was manageable. So 3 films under 90 minutes. It was a great triple feature for me. Unfortunately, the film in the middle was sandwiched in between 2 films that I enjoyed significantly more, especially this last one, House by the Cemetery. I really sort of went off with a bang with this triple feature. Read the fine print. You may have just mortgaged your life. After a doctor kills his mistress and himself while researching the mysterious previous owner of his Boston home, his colleague, Dr. Norman Boyle, takes over his research and moves his family from New York City to that same Boston mansion. Soon after, Boyle's young son Bob becomes plagued by visions of a young girl who warns him of the danger within the house. If you haven't seen House by the Cemetery yet, it's definitely not in the like A-tier horror films that you need to watch, but definitely once you start getting into your B-tier, like, you know, your Demons, and Demons 2, I'd even maybe put like, no, Returning of the Living Dead is definitely A-tier, but once you sort of get into like your lesser known sort of films, this is like the cream of the crop. This is one of the better ones that you could be watching. So definitely add House by the Cemetery to your watch list while it is still on Shudder. Hopefully it's still on Shudder by the time this episode releases. But House by the Cemetery definitely gets 3.5 stars from me. Really enjoyed it quite a bit. We're moving on to the month of March. It is the month of my birth, the month of my rebirth, the month of the year that kind of sucks. March, like weather-wise, is always trash. My stress levels are always super high in the month of March. Not a fan of the month of March in general. I'm not a St. Patrick's Day guy. Month of March, not one of my favorite months of the year. Unfortunate that my birthday takes place in a month that I don't really like. Did watch a lot of films this month. Not all of them were horror films. Got to the theater a couple times this month. So overall, it was a decent month, although I don't really like March that much. And we will be starting off on March 1st with the first film that I watched of the month, which was Hush. Of course, from director Mike Flanagan, one of my favorite, you know, sort of recent horror auteurs. Of course, the mastermind behind The Haunting of Hill House, Bly Manor. He did Oculus, which is one of my favorite horror films to come out in the last, like, 15 years, I guess now. It's been out for a while. Maybe not 15. It's been out for 10-ish years. So, definitely one of my favorite horror directors still working today. Of course, he did Dr. Sleep. Hush was a film he did in 2016. His first out of, he actually did a couple films in 2016, I guess. It was kind of a busy year for him, sort of these late 2010s. He was doing a lot of shit during this time. So, of course, it was directed by Mike Flanagan. Silence can be killer. A deaf woman is stalked by a psychotic killer in her secluded home. It's a very simple story. It's a lot more basic than a lot of Flanagan's work, which I think, you know, kind of works to the film's disadvantage, but it also makes it more watchable, and a lot easier to just put it on, shut your brain off, and watch something like this than it would be to watch something like Oculus or Haunting of Hill House or something like that. A little more intense. And Dr. Sleep, of course, very long film, stuff like that. So this is a simple, you know, less than an hour and a half, just straightforward home invasion horror film. It's got a very tense climax and a very tense opening, but I think the middle can kind of drag itself at times. Especially, like neighbors get involved, and it's like, oh, is this guy going in the house? Does he actually know her? Is this her creepy ex-boyfriend? Is this someone that she needs to be there? Or like, what's going on with this? There's like a lot of stuff in the middle, which I think definitely kills the momentum quite a bit. I think you could have kept building from the beginning all the way up until the climax and had a much better experience throughout. But for what it is, as I said, it's a nice, simple, it's a short film, very easy to watch. So Hush, I do recommend it. It's one of the Netflix like staples. Like, I feel like it's been on Netflix since it came out, and it has just stayed on Netflix. Like, it never left. I don't think it was a Netflix original or anything, but it's just kind of, that's where it lives. That's where it's kind of always been. This was the second time I watched the film, but it was my first time rating it on Letterboxd. For some reason, when I watched it the first time, back when it first came out, I never rated it, so I rated it for the first time now, because I would assume in 2016 I was on Letterboxd. I can't really remember. I'm sure I could find out by going to like the end of my diary or something, but regardless, coming up a few days later, I watched Last Night in Soho, another film with Anya Taylor-Joy and directed by Edgar Wright. Edgar Wright, one of my favorite like comedy directors. He of course did, Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, stuff like that. He did Baby Driver and Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. This was his latest effort. It does fall more into like psychological thriller, does have some horror elements to it as well. This is one I definitely overhyped myself for. I thought it was going to be way better than what it was, although I still enjoyed it quite a bit. It was still a 3.5-star film for me, but I had just wished that there had been a little bit more to it than there was. For a film that seemed like it was going to be very complex and have a lot of moving parts, it was actually a lot more simplified than maybe I would have wanted it to be. When the past lets you in, the truth will come out. A young girl passionate about fashion design is mysteriously able to enter the 1960s, where she encounters her idol, a dazzling wannabe singer. But 1960s London is not what it seems, and time seems to be falling apart with shady consequences. And of course, there's a big twist at the end. I like the environment and the worlds this sets up, the modern world and the world of the 1960s. I like the environment. Of course, all the set pieces are good. It's very well directed, very well acted throughout. She's like staying in this house, and there's an older woman who's like the landlord, and she's trying to like build a relationship with her, tell her stories, stuff like that. And of course, there are some twists and turns along the way. Obviously with her getting pulled into the 1960s for portions of it, seeing visions of the past, visions that maybe you wouldn't want to see. Maybe you're seeing a little bit of murder. Maybe you're seeing some things that are freaking you out a little bit. Maybe the person you're seeing in modern day, like out at the bar, who's a little older, maybe he's actually this creepy guy that you saw in the 60s. And so there's a lot of stuff like that going on. So I do recommend the film. I do wish that it was a little bit better than what it was, but regardless, for what it is, it's still 3.5. It's still good. So on March 9th, opening day for Scream 6, I talked to Miles. I'm like, bro, let's go to the theaters. Let's go see a film. Let's go see Scream 6, opening day. Actually, opening day maybe would have been the day before, but this was the Friday night. Let's go see a film. Miles says we gotta go see 65, which came out the same day as Scream 6. 65, not a horror film. It's more like, I can't even remember if it was PG or PG-13. Like, it felt like, I don't know. But regardless, we'll talk about it a little bit, because it still has a little bit of horror elements in it. And I mean, why not? We're here. We can talk about 65 for a little bit, which stars Adam Driver fighting the dinosaurs. It's a typical Miles movie. This movie has Miles written all over it. 65 million years ago, prehistoric Earth had a visitor. 65 million years ago, the only two survivors of a spaceship from Somaris that crash landed on Earth must fend off dinosaurs and reach the escape vessel in time before an imminent asteroid strikes, threatens to destroy the planet. This is one of the most forgettable films of all time. It is Adam Driver and a young child trying to survive in a world of dinosaurs. Besides that, I can't really tell you anything that happens. It's just them getting from point A to point B. They fight some dinosaurs. They get in a rocket ship. That's pretty much all there is to it. For what it is, it's pretty good for what it is. I mean, it's fine. Like, it's a 3-star, forgettable. You put it in, you watch it, and then that's it. It's just a popcorn movie. It should have been like a summer movie. Like, it should have been like, this came out like on the cusp of summer. It was a weird mid-March movie. It was weird they released it the same day as Scream 6. Miles and I have talked about this on many other shows, that they need to get better at spreading out releases. Like, you shouldn't release like 2 movies that are like bigger movies, or like stuff with like A-list actors, or stuff that are gonna like draw people in the same weekend. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, Oppenheimer and Barbie coming out the same day doesn't make any sense at all. There's a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense, like Scream 6 and 65, like Five Nights at Freddy's and Saw 10 coming out on the same day. It's like, why would you do that? But a couple days later, I went to the cinemas by myself, and I watched Scream 6, which is what we should have been watching originally. New York, new rules. Following the latest Ghostface killings, the 4 survivors leave Woodsboro behind and start a fresh chapter in New York City. One of the greatest openings in Scream franchise history. The opening to this one, it rivals, I'm not gonna say it rivals the the opening in the original, because the original one is phenomenal, but it is a very good opening, like post pre opening credits kind of scenario. Very, very good. I love the film throughout. Probably my second favorite in the Scream franchise. It only has a couple parts in it that warrant bitching about. And I've brought it up on other shows, but this film is basically, it does the most fuck you in any franchise film besides Halloween Ends. And by that I mean Halloween Ends was a big fuck you to the entire franchise leading up to it and all the fans that paid money to go see it. But Scream 6, Scream 5 kind of did like the soft reboot kind of thing, sort of leading people in, where you don't necessarily need to see all of the other films in order to enjoy Scream 5. Scream 6 comes along and basically goes balls to the wall with that, says fuck you to anyone who hasn't seen every single Scream movie, and literally puts up on a police bulletin board the killers from every single Scream movie, thus spoiling every single plot twist in the Scream franchise, revealing who all the killers are right there in broad daylight up on a fucking, I swear to God, they're like even breaking down the killers like one by one and describing them and how they did it, literally ruining every movie in the franchise up until that point if you haven't seen them already. And it makes no sense, because then if you have seen them already, it's not like you need to hear these stories again. They don't need to really re-explain themselves, but they do. So it's a very just unnecessary scene in the film, very unnecessary moment. Which, you know, like, as I said, if you haven't seen every film in the Scream franchise, it pretty much ruins it for you. The other thing that kind of took me out of it is that the main detective character in this is played by the dude who was Gavin in Friends. What, I can't even remember. Oh, Dermot Mulroney is his name. He plays Detective Bailey in this. Very famous Rachel boyfriend from the show Friends. And, of course, Monica Geller, Courtney Cox, is also in Scream 6. So the entire time I'm watching this film, all I'm thinking about is Friends. So that's a very me issue. I can't hold that against the film itself. But regardless, it warrants mention. So Scream 6, I give it 4 stars. I think it's very good. It's very close to 4.5 if it didn't have... There were a couple other, like, nitpicky things in there, like nothing really worth bringing up or, you know, arguing about. But the whole... There's so many things in this that I think were on the cusp of greatness. I maybe I need to rewatch it. Maybe it was just sort of recency bias, seeing it in the theater. But I really do think it's the second best one besides the original. Which is surprising, because it's like a new environment, you know, Neve Campbell doesn't return and stuff like that, but I think it's a worthy contender to second best in the franchise, for sure. Later that day, on Peacock, I watched the unrated version of Megan, a film that everyone had been telling me to see. My wife saw it in theaters, she loved it. Miles saw it in theaters, surprisingly didn't love it, which was very weird, because it seems like a very Miles movie. It was something that everyone, basically except Miles, was sort of raving about, said that it was very good. And I finally got around to watching it like 2 months late. Friendship has evolved. A brilliant toy company roboticist uses artificial intelligence to develop Megan, a real-life doll programmed to emotionally bond with her newly orphaned niece. But when the doll's programming works too well, she becomes overprotective of her new friend, with terrifying results. It's a nice twist on the Killer Doll movie, of course, from Twilight Zone, stuff like Child's Play, stuff like that. I feel like they really, when they made this film, they knew they were making trash. I feel like they tried to make something stupid, but it ended up actually turning out way better than they intended it to be. It's sort of like a reverse sort of psychology, I guess, a reverse, sort of result than what they were planning on. You have people like Tommy Wiseau making The Room, trying to make like this epic drama, and it turns out being one of the best comedies of all time. I feel like this tried to be so stupid and so campy and so unwatchable that it actually turned out to be pretty good. I don't think it's anything groundbreaking. It's not something I'm going to be returning to frequently or maybe ever again. And like, it's not something I'm going to be popping in every year to go watch, but it was a good one-time watch. It was a good 3 stars. Like I said, the humor is good in it. The acting is good in it. There's the scene where Megan is stalking the kid at it's basically like a little like after school program, like summer camp kind of thing. And she tracks him down in the woods. That scene is great. There's a lot of stuff in the film that I really do like. Like I said, they wanted it to be like this campy B movie, which it is, but I think it actually sort of rises above that and becomes just an actual good film and loses sort of its like camp quality. I'm excited for Megan 2.0. That should be coming out very soon. Very excited for that one. Coming up a few days later, I watched Perfect Blue, one of the most highly regarded anime films of all time, from Satoshi Kon, who I am a big fan of. His film Paprika, another one, is one of my favorites. I've been wanting to see Tokyo Godfathers for a long time, which is one of his like Christmassy films. It takes place around the holidays, so excited to see that too. I saw Perfect Blue a long time ago, so again, this was another like first watch on Letterboxd. It does get pretty intense. There are some intense moments in it, so definitely watch it with caution. But it is one of the most, kind of beautiful, highly regarded, one of the best anime films of all time, in my opinion, and the critics also agree. The color of illusion is perfect blue. A retired pop singer turned actress' sense of reality is shaken when she is stalked by an obsessed fan and seemingly a ghost of her past. Again, one of the best of all time. Not too much to say about it, but it's definitely an essential watch if you like anime. It's an essential watch if you don't like anime and you're just a horror fan. It should be in one of those lists of like 1,000 films to see before you die or 100 films to see before you die, because that's definitely one that I feel like most people need to check off their bucket list. Coming up in the later portion of March here, there were a lot of films I watched that were not horror films, but I'll bring them up just because I fucking love bringing them up. I rewatched all the Wallace and Gromit movies. And one of them actually is sort of horror. Actually, they all have scary shit in them. We're going to talk about Wallace and Gromit for a minute, guys. So, I also watched Trainspotting in that too. So let's talk about Trainspotting just for a little bit before we go on the Wallace and Gromit iceberg. And the Wallace and Gromit, I don't know what I'm calling it. The Wallace and Gromit sort of sidetrack. The side quest of Wallace and Gromit. We will talk about Trainspotting just for a little bit. Of course, directed by Danny Boyle. Choose Life. Mark Renton, deeply immersed in the Edinburgh drug scene, tries to clean up and get out despite the allure of drugs and influence of friends. This is a horror film because drugs are fucking scary, especially hard drugs like this. One of the most classic films of all time. Again, this is another one that if you haven't seen it, this is one to get off your bucket list. The scene where the baby, and I'm not ruining anything because everyone has seen this image, it's been parodying in Family Guy and all kinds of shit. When the baby is on the roof and he's just screaming his head off, it's a scene you will never forget. So Trainspotting definitely gets another one for me. Another solid buddy seal of approval for me. So now as we round out the month of March, I also saw Clerks 3 during this. I did not like the ending of Clerks 3 because I think it was very stupid to do what they could have done, because they could have done Clerks 4 and kept going, which they might still do, but I don't know. I have some problems with Clerks 3, but there's some things about Clerks 3 that I really love, because Clerks 3 is a movie about making movies, and that is my favorite subgenre of film. But anyway, everything else besides that I watched in this month were Wallace and Gromit related. So there are, of course, the 3 original short films, the feature-length film, Wallace and Gromit: Curse of the Were-Rabbit, and the newer short film, which was undeniably not as good as the rest of the things in the franchise. But of course, A Grand Day Out from 1989, Wallace and Gromit have run out of cheese, and this provides an excellent excuse for the animated duo to take the holiday to the moon. Where, as everyone knows, there is ample cheese. The moon is inhabited by a mechanical caretaker who is not happy about the 2 visitors from Earth that nibble on the moon. Obviously, one of the greatest sci-fi horror films of all time, Wallace and Gromit: A Grand Day Out. There is a robot on the moon trying to kill these guys. I can't think of anything scarier than that. Certified sci-fi horror classic. Coming up next, The Wrong Trousers. This, of course, from 1993. All of these directed by Nick Park, by the way. Gromit finds himself being pushed out of his room and home by a new lodger who is actually a ruthless criminal and a small penguin. The penguin is planning a robbery and needs to use Wallace and his mechanical remote controlled by Trousers to pull off the raid. However, Gromit is wise to the penguin and comes to the rescue. One of the greatest espionage horror films of all time. There's a penguin with a gun trying to shoot you. And he's living in your house. He's doing freaky ass shit in your house. Certified espionage home invasion horror classic. Coming up right after that, we have A Close Shave from 1995, also directed by Nick Park. Wallace's whirlwind romance with the proprietor of a local wool shop puts his head in a spin, and Gromit is framed for sheep rustling in a fiendish criminal plot. One of the most potentially gory, kidnapping, basically slasher films of all time. Wallace and Gromit: A Close Shave. There is a villain who is turning these sheep into dog food. And he's kidnapping sheep. He's stealing their wool. He's trying to kidnap Shaun the sheep, who is now living with Wallace and Gromit. He's trying to kill Wallace, kill Gromit. Very gory, potential slasher horror film. Then we have the creature feature, Wallace and Gromit: The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. Directed in 2005 by Nick Park and Steve Box. Something bunny is going on. Cheese-loving eccentric Wallace and his cunning canine pal Gromit investigate a mystery in Nick Park's animated adventure, in which the lovable inventor and his intrepid pup run a business ridding the town of garden pests. Using only humane methods that turn their home into a halfway house for evicted vermin, the pair stumble upon a mystery involving a vegetarian monster that threatens to ruin the annual veggie growing contest. One of the greatest creature features of all time. One of the greatest monster on the loose horror films of all time. Wallace and Gromit: The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. Incredible. It was actually the winner of the Oscar that year for Best Animated Feature Film. Incredible masterpiece. And I'm not saying any of this sarcastically, by the way. I love Wallace and Gromit. I know my tone is being very strange, and I'm acting like an asshole, but I actually love these films a lot. Then we watched A Matter of Loaf and Death. Wallace and Gromit open a bakery, accidentally getting tied up with a murder mystery in the process. But when Wallace falls in love, Gromit is left to solve the case by himself. Again, not as good as the rest, but still relatively enjoyable. Probably the only one I'm not going to really revisit too often. But, again, another great murderous horror film. Wallace and Gromit: A Matter of Loaf and Death. And that rounds out the month of March, and that's actually going to round out all of the films that I'm talking about in this podcast. I can't think of a better note than ending this on this Wallace and Gromit rampage. I can't think of a better way to end this portion of the podcast. I can't think of a better way to end part 1 of every single horror film I saw in 2023 reviewed. I can't think of a better way to end it. So we're going to end it with this. I thank all of you guys for listening and watching. I thank all of you for sticking with me through my insanity. And I will see you guys in the outro, which I'm going to be recording momentarily. Even though I could do the outro now, you know I like to put in the music and I do a little separate outro. So this is the outro, the intro to the outro, which is coming in right now. Well, that's about it this time, guys. Welcome to the real outro of the show. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Once again, I want to remind you guys, if you haven't already, to please make sure you're subscribing to my channel and subscribing to the show wherever you're listening to the show, whether it be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get the show. Make sure you are supporting the show, sharing it with a friend, and doing all of those great things. Follow me on social media. I appreciate all the love and support you guys have been giving me over the past few years. And with that, I will be back here again for another episode of the House of Horror coming out very, very soon. So with that, you guys, take care and stay spooky.